Hello everyone, my name is Curtis Rottenauer, and for this project I created an application. The first part that I needed to do, I had to actually create a server so that I could upload my files to the internet and access my MySQL document. So I chose to use an Apache server, and to show you that it's working, I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here and restart my Apache server. Now, the reason that I chose to use Apache is that it works with PHP and it's very easy to get it to start working with your MySQL document. So throughout this, you're going to see that essentially I'm referencing my MySQL database that I put onto my computer. Alright, so now that I have my Apache server up and running, I'll show you all my MySQL database that I created. Essentially, I had to download some stuff and put it onto my local host. As you can see up at the top, it's actually running on my machine itself. So essentially, my database that I'm using is MyDB, and you can create tables just by hitting the name and saying exactly how many columns you want to have and defining how much information is there. I created a review table. You can see a little bit of data that I have in there, so we're going to be revisiting that so you can see whenever I update it using my application that it's actually put into my database itself. So take note of the table columns that I have, hotel, username, user rate, and user review. They're all there. I will be referencing those throughout the rest of the application. So as I stated before, I'm using my review table, and I'm going to actually insert data into this table by using a PHP document. I'm going to show you all right now. It's right now sitting on my Apache server. I essentially upload it into the server just by copying and pasting the document on there. As you can see, this is the code for the PHP document itself. I essentially put in the variables so that I can define where or how to connect to my MySQL document and the database. I then return these variables, hotel, username, user rate, and user rev. Whenever I open up this document, if it's coming from my application, I can actually get all that from there and insert it directly into my table review. As you can see right here, I'm inserting those values, and then I disconnect. So to create my application, I actually used Android Studio, and I chose to use this because I can essentially just run my document. It has a very simple plugin to get it to work with Genymotion. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I essentially just choose Genymotion as the emulator that I want to use, hit OK, and in just a moment it should bring up my application. There it is. Alright. So essentially, the purpose of my application is actually to insert user reviews of hotels. Up at the top, you can actually see that I reference a few of the hotels that you can see, but right now we're going to focus on the review now. It takes us to another page where I can enter my hotel name that I want to enter. In this case, let's say Motel 6. There we go. And then I can enter a username. In this case, I'm going to use my brother-in-law's usual username. Put in a rating. Horrible. Let's say he saw some roaches. There we go. And go ahead and hit the Submit Review button. It gives me a little toast saying review has been entered. And now I can go back into my actual database. You can see from before that it's got the Marriott C. Rottenauer original one. Whenever I refresh it, you can see that now the Motel 6 from the Dan 1 has been added into my database. And to revisit the stuff at the top, you can see how just by clicking on my different buttons, I can bring up little informations on the hotels. So in this case, it just takes me to another page where in the future, you could add a lot more information on those hotels. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and show you folks exactly what my code looked like. As I said before, I used Android Studio for this project. I like using it because it gives me a nice little preview area and a nice GUI to actually create my entire document. You can drag and drop stuff over, you can run it. It's got a very nice little Genymotion plugin. And over on the left hand side you can see there's easy navigation because it gives me all these directories and documents needed that I can create on the fly for my application. So looking back at it, this is sort of my main activity. This is the code behind it. You can see whenever I click on them, I have a few different buttons, each with a separate on-click event. And then I can go ahead right now, I can show you all the text that I have, my application, what it's going to do. Click the Review Now button, and it's going to take me down here where you can see the Review Now is what I said is the text. And then I have the on-click event right now set to the user review button. So whenever I go here to the main activity, the user review, you can actually see right here that it's going to go ahead and start the review class. The review class is a Java class that I have right here. So upon starting it, you can actually see that the onCreate event will set the layout equal to review. In this case, that review is actually a layout that I have down at the bottom. You can see that right here, and the preview should come up in a second. And that is how I change the layout based on a button click. So you can see essentially what it does. I accept user input for these different variables, and I store them. You can see over here the code behind that, each of which has a different ID. And then I can go ahead and go to my Submit Review button. Right now it's cut off a little bit because the little preview isn't quite large enough, but it still works fine. The on-click event I have right now set to User Review. So if I go back over to Review, you can see User Review, where it will start running my central task, which will feed all of the data that I entered right back over into my central. Essentially, I create a URL that will reference the review.php document, and that PHP document is fed all of the variables that I originally created from that previous review. And I create a connection, an HTTP URL connection. I output that data, buffer it, and then I encode it. You can notice that the names that I set for the encoding are the same ones that I have within the PHP document, so that I can actually get the data out of that. The data is then written to it, and the connection is closed. I return review entered, and that's actually going to end up being displayed down with the toast, because it'll just give me that little blurb essentially saying that my review has been entered and that it has been accepted into my database. It's very quick and easy to do. Stop that. So the last thing that I want to touch on within my code, you actually go into it, I essentially stated a little bit earlier that I have buttons at the top of my layouts that can redirect me to different pages where I have my hotel information listed. So essentially each of those buttons are given a different on-click event, and in this case this one's user review 4. Essentially each of those I go back into my main activity and they will go ahead and start a different activity. In this case, whenever I click that one, it'll take me to Hotel C, and upon clicking that it will essentially bring up my Hotel C layout and display it as such. I can put any information I want in there. Right now I left it very, very basic. So as you can see right here, I put essentially within every page, I put that there is a different method that can be called to change it. Whenever I go into the activity manifest, In order to have those activities actually perform any function, you have to tell the manifest that they are functions that can be called. So I did that right there. And then I have to tell the Android manifest that my emulator has permissions to access the internet. This has to be done so that whenever I attempt to access that PHP file, I can actually do it to send my data over to input it directly into it. And that's essentially my project. So for this project, I actually ran into many issues. I'm not very familiar at all with Android Studio, so I had to do a lot of outside research in order to how to create a proper working application. Additionally, getting the pages to open up on button clicks was very difficult for me. But I have to say there is a wealth of information out there, and that's how I was able to overcome that issue. Also, connecting my database over to my Android application was extremely difficult. As I stated before, within my Android manifest, you have to give it permissions so that it can actually send that data over. I was not aware of this, and I was going insane for a little while trying to figure out exactly how to get it to send that information over, but the one line of code fixed that problem. I found that in a forum. There were a lot of other issues, such as getting Apache to work on my machine and getting my SQL to work properly as well. All of those were circumvented just by continually working and figuring out exactly how to do them. Additionally, I found out that if you're attempting to reference your local machine using an emulator, it can't be your normal address or writing localhost. It has to be a very specific one, such as in this case it was 127.032 instead of what I usually use to access my local host. I'm sure there were more issues, but those were the most pressing ones. Well, that and the fact that my computer throughout this entire process was battling a virus, and there were a lot of issues associated with that. So there are a lot of reasons why someone would use Android Studio. Android Studio creates a very easy to use user environment so that you can create your applications. There's also a lot of documentation within it, going to the help button, and it can be used to create a very easy application. Apache is great for running off of your own machine. In this case, I found out that Apache can be used to run PHP documents. So in this case, I would use that to insert all my data into my database. All of these things, essentially, you use them as a developer because they are much easier than other alternatives.